All right.
You ready?
Yeah, good to go.
Okay, Fulcrum of Truth. Got a good topic today, one that I want to talk about early because I feel like it really goes into it's fundamental to the
Yeah.
way we think and the way we approach things, approach thinking itself, and approach interpretation of information. And that for me is the dependability of past knowledge principle. And, you know, give me a little background or give the viewers a little
Yeah.
background about what we mean by
So,
that.
well, basically, this idea started with me back in college when I was only 20 years old. I was taking anthropology, and the anthropologist, what a teacher and a professor, was explaining a story about how scientists around that time in like 1960s and 70s when he was younger, he was studying. They said they discovered a way to systematically figure out how many races of people there were on Earth, and that the only time that they found out that what they were doing was bad science was when they came to the day when they found out there was more races than actual people on Earth. So it was kind of like an epiphany moment where they realized what they were doing was wrong, and the proof was that there can't be more races of people than there is people on Earth. And before that, there was nothing showing them that what they were doing was wrong in terms of, well, except for their probably ignorance and bias while they were doing their work. But the professor then explained basically like, everything that is in your parents' textbooks that's sitting on their shelves from when they were in college, and a lot of the things that were taught in colleges even 10 or 20 years prior to when we were there is wrong now. That you couldn't bring those books in from home that your parents have and use them in class. You couldn't argue with what was understood now being wrong and what was understood then being right. We've progressed the knowledge, and he basically said that you could go home and throw away those books at home. And it just made me, it dawned on me at that point that, and I began kind of cultivating this understanding that the most important thing that I learned in college was that it's all going to be wrong in 10 years. It's all going to be wrong in 100 years. Like, they rewrite these textbooks. You have to buy new textbooks every 3 to 5 years. You can't reuse the textbooks from previous because the information is different. Even if it's just slightly different, you're going to end up getting a test question wrong or something like that. So that, leads into the growth of the understanding of this dependability of past knowledge. And when we began delving into the book and into our real, like, I guess our goal of the theory of everything, what we work on, right? The unification of theory of the universe, or whatever you want to call it. It has to, there's a big hinge point on understanding that what we know now is most likely not right. And that when we go back 1,000 years and we look at what we understood 1,000 years ago, it's like, obviously what we understand now is going to be wrong in 1,000 years from now. So take that into every thought that you have and every theory that you have and every exploration of any system that you're looking at. Like, the things they know now about it are not necessarily true. They're just what's best understood and these people agree upon. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that comes to mind, and this was a while ago now, maybe a month, I don't know if you remember exactly, but you said you were reading an article about the half-life of information.
Yeah, there's already been a theory. The guy has a theory. I apologize not having the name of it. But it's a well-known theory where it's just the half-life of information. One of his big examples of half-life of knowledge, I think, is what they said. And one of his big examples was in psychology, and that the half-life of knowledge in psychology was like, well, I can't remember. I think it was said like 18 months or something like that.
I can't remember either.
Maybe 5 years.
I
Let's
think
give him
I think
5
maybe it
years.
was 5 years,
Yeah.
but yeah, and that
At the greatest, it was 5 years, and that's really saying something. I mean, it takes longer than 5 years to get a master's degree in psychology. So you're essentially saying that what you're learning your freshman year, any specialized information, by the time you get 8 years into your field, that information's got to fall off the shelf, and you got to learn all new books. And what does that really give you in terms of confidence about what you're learning?
yeah. So the way I interpret that is kind of if I pick up a psychology textbook from 5 years ago, I can expect half of the information to need updating at a minimum, and if not, be completely wrong.
Yeah.
Is that kind of how you look
Yeah,
at it? And
that's
I'll tell
exactly
you,
it.
when you told me that, I wasn't that shocked, because you see it. You just think about what we were told 5 years ago. right? Are eggs good for you or are eggs bad for you? I don't
Yeah,
know.
you've said it before. And the, another thing that to me is, I'm going to go ahead and say it, it's absolutely moronic to listen to the story about how we believed we rotated, that the sun rotated around the earth and the earth rotated around the sun, and how that transition in common knowledge changed in society. Like, when we hear about that story, we're kind of told that for so long people believed that the sun revolved around the earth. Like scientists, all the people in academia and the philosophers and anybody that was, renowned as having information or knowledge, they believed that the sun revolved around the earth. And then we talk about how, I believe it was Galileo that
Yeah.
made the
Galileo? I
made
think
it,
so.
I think so, yeah, he was really persecuted because in his lifetime for coming out as saying that the sun revolved around the earth revolved around the sun, and it was the opposite of what we thought. But when we hear that story, it's like hundreds of years or however many years we believed one thing, and then in one day or a short period of time compared to that time, we transitioned our thinking and everybody came to the conclusion that we were wrong about that, but we believe this now. But everybody never considered the fact that we were wrong that whole time before. We probably are wrong now too. Like, if you get it right one day out of a year, the next year you don't think, oh, I'm going to get it right every day.
Right.
You know what I mean? You got to consider, okay, I got it wrong 364 days last year. I'm probably going to get it wrong 364 days this year. And they literally got it right. They thought once and literally gave up the whole idea that they got it wrong before. It's people are so biased towards their beliefs.
Right, right. And when we look at academic, scholarly writings and, presentations, journals, things like that, everybody's building on prior work, right? And that's great. That's a great thing. We've had a lot of miraculous advances. But yeah, to think that that is like the final answer and is going to be right from now until eternity, and then we're not going to learn something new that revises the way that we think about things is a foolish way to approach the world. So, you and I both, I think you'll agree, we just approach everything with a very open mind.
Yeah. Well,
I'm willing to listen to anything that anyone has to say and not just throw it out. Although I'm fairly convinced the Earth revolves around the sun.
I know you are, but it goes into the idea like, if you look at academia right now, what it would take for a astrophysicist or somebody that studied the cosmos in that high in at that postgraduate level, you know what I mean, doing research, for them to propose that we didn't revolve around the sun, right? This is like career suicide, no matter what.
Yeah.
Like you're signing up for
Ridicule.
your life to be. It's like, okay, if I'm right, my life, it's never going to be agreed upon during my life, right? I need to put this out, and it's going to be a sacrifice to my career and my future and everything. And then hopefully after I die one day, it'll come back and they'll realize, okay, he was right. But that's what you're signing yourself up for because of how much pressure they've put on, staying in line and not stepping out of line and questioning anything, right? So when we focus on this dependability of past knowledge principle and kind of say all of our thinking is going to involve that, we're really opening the door to a realm of possibilities that is nearly impossible in academia and in the field of science right now. If you publish a paper in a journal that's contrary to the mainstream thinking, you might not even get it published, and you're going to have a problem getting funding and all that in the future.
Yeah, I know a big one we talk about often is, Egyptology and dependability of past knowledge as it relates to that in so many different aspects, in that there's this ingrained thinking, and this is just one example, and there are people out there bucking the trend on some of these things, and they're just labeled crackpots and crazy, but they ask some good questions, and while I think maybe some of them take it too far for the sensationalism aspect of it and to make a buck, which, good for them. It's marketing. That's, that's their job. They're trying to make a living off of it. that doesn't mean that they don't ask good questions, right? And, one where dependability of past knowledge plays a huge role is just the translation of hieroglyphs, right? And you've talked a lot about that.
Yeah. I haven't, unfortunately, I still have not gotten the time or the opportunity to do what I've talked to you about doing, which is to delve into and all the nuts and bolts and details of basically learning how to translate hieroglyphics, the journey of time through when we first began to understand them, to breaking all the barriers that we did, the timeline of that, knowing all those pieces, like how they put together those puzzle pieces to get to where they got to, would help to deconstruct it if we're going to question it, right? You have to, I've told you this before, right? Before you can talk about something and say somebody's wrong about something, you have to know what they're saying they're wrong about. You know what I mean? So I haven't done that yet. But what I can tell you is that I have gone into the Sanskrit and Devanagari and Brahmi ancient languages, all the Indo languages, proto languages of that area, right? And I've compared them to hieroglyphs and to papyrus script. And I can tell you that without a doubt there are similarities, right? There are characteristics within both of those languages from BC times that show that they absolutely have a parent language that is in common, right? And I don't think that the common understandings or current understandings of the hieroglyphics translations lend to that. They do not say there's any connection between the the proto Hindu Arabic languages and the papyrus script and Egyptian hieroglyphs. They haven't made a official connection between them.
And we're talking about writing, 3, 4, 5,000 years old, even in some cases. And, when I just think about our own language, right, we're being native English speakers. I'm fairly certain that if you gave me a book written in proper English from 500 years ago, I probably wouldn't understand it, or only understand half of it, right? And that's just our own language. Mm-hmm. Now we want to talk about translating older languages. And we, like you said, we've looked a lot into Sanskrit and whatnot, not so deep into the hieroglyphics side of things, but I think about the story of how they decoded hieroglyphs, right? And it came from that, what was that tablet called? I'm drawing a blank.
Rosetta Stone.
Yeah, Rosetta Stone, right? And, what was this? 1800s sometime?
I think
maybe somewhere around there.
Yeah.
And whoever did the translation I believe they used the Greek version that was on that Rosetta Stone to kind of crack the code of the hieroglyphs that were on the Rosetta Stone. And I just think to myself, like, there's no way that person doing the translating was a native ancient Greek speaker. So at best, they were trained from some textbook and, learned
there's
the 1,000 years of history of Greek language.
Yeah.
That's like asking me to read a book in old English.
Well, there's a point that I have not really heard brought up in terms of the Rosetta Stone, and that's the fact that and I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure I could be wrong. I think Napoleon found it. Okay, I think he found it. It was already, whoever found it though, it was already broken away from whatever structure it was a part of prior.
Yeah.
Okay, so they found it as a stone. Okay. Has anybody done the math on the probability that those texts are actually copies of each other? And there's a chance that it could be part of a much larger script and that it doesn't contain all the information. I mean, how do they know that the bottom corner of those 3 paragraphs are exactly the same part of the paragraphs? You know what I mean?
Right, exactly. Although, if I'm not mistaken, I believe they're right, because the Egyptians were contemporary with the Greeks in the later part of ancient history. The Greeks and the Egyptians existed at the same time, so it's reasonable to think. And if I'm not mistaken, the way they were able to crack the code was with like the names of kings, right?
Yeah, but
And
this is
that's how they
something we
came up
also,
with the cartouche thing. Oh, that must be somebody's name.
this is something
Because
else we
it's
question now,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like,
They made some leaps.
yeah,
They had to make some leaps. And so, but then the errors compound on each other, right? First, you got this historian or whoever that isn't, maybe that person was an absolute top expert in ancient Greek language. Let's just give them the benefit of that doubt. But yeah, then you got things like, how do you know you're reading the exact same portion? Are there coincidences between the names of the kings and the cartouches and things like that? And just because a cartouche can mean a name doesn't mean it can't mean something else, right? We've talked about this a lot. Words have a lot of different meanings. And over time, those meanings change and there's context, and you really need to know what you're doing, right? Like,
yeah,
even like, how many times has the Bible been rewritten in 2,000 years? So many times
yeah.
that I don't even know what I'm reading today, how close it is to what was actually written down when it first was published. Um, you
Yeah,
know,
well, the what's really wild is all those ancient languages, they fail to have periods and sentence structure. You know, you don't know where the sentences start and end. I still to this day don't understand how they have extrapolated sentence structure from these paragraphs when they're just a grid of characters. You know what I mean? A complete grid of characters, no periods, no spaces, no capitals, no nothing like that, right? Many of them don't even contain consonants and stuff. You know what I mean? Like, it'll be like if you have a paragraph that will have 26 letters in it, right? And it has all these different words and all these different vowels and consonants connecting it. These grid of characters will have half the consonants. You know what I mean? And it's just because the language is so ancient that they haven't developed all these extra sounds to go around all the vowels. You know, so how did you develop all these extra words? And then we find that, like, each, you know, when you look at the Sanskrit translations and what they have in terms of what they understand now, you'll see characters that have 8 different meanings. And it's like, how does every word have 8 different meanings? How do, you know, that when you start doing that, did you start making stuff up? You know, because you did it, because it can't be that arbitrary. You know what I mean? Especially when they were, I still to this day do not believe that these characters are arbitrary in any means, that all of these languages started from numbers, that letters started from numbers, and that the numbers were some type of non-ambiguous connection to a function. You know, so very, you know, we see Chinese, right, still being this character-driven language where the snowy mountain used to be a picture of a snowy mountain, essentially. You know what I mean? And
right.
it's transferred and translated and manipulated over thousands of years to become what it is now, where it's hard to tell for somebody that doesn't understand the language, but it's still derived from a picture of a snowy mountain, right, or a cold mountain or something like that. All numbers and letters and words, they come from that. You know what I mean? They come from some type of non-ambiguous system. I don't believe that humans have made a ambiguous character system in a grid of letters, and where every character means 8 different things. This would make communication like impossible, you know?
Yeah, but then you also see the extreme in the other direction too, where you hear about these languages that have like 50 words for whatever running, you know,
Yeah.
because it's like so, you know, core to their beliefs and their way of life that they have developed multiple words. But when you start to go further and further and back in time, it's reasonable to expect that, right, language develops over time. You have to teach people, okay, this is a new word, this is what it means, right? Millennial, whatever it is, you know, we get new words into our lexicon or into our dictionary every year, of things that get created and now have a meaning, and it's relevant to the people of the time.
Yeah.
But it may not be relevant to the people 2,000 years from now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially some of the weird words that we...
Yeah, circling back, right? So in terms of dependability of past knowledge, like this, when you look at ancient languages, when you look at the understandings we have of ancient scripts and ancient understandings and information, you know, I think that we're a day away every day from somebody making a discovery if not ourselves, like what we work on, where it's going to make a breakthrough in understanding of a language or understanding of a system that the ancients knew, that we have a lot of literature on and a lot of information on, but we don't understand. But when we make that breakthrough, it's going to lead to a huge breakthrough in some type of understanding in science or religion or society or whatever it is that we have remnants of from the past that we don't have the best way to interpret and understand it, you know?
Yeah, and you touched earlier a little bit on this, and I want to circle back to it. There, within the scientific community, and scholarly community, historical community, people who are trying to, most people have good intentions. They're good at heart. They really want to, do something right. They want to reveal something. That motivation can blind you to forcing a result, right? And sometimes it's very difficult to cross-check those kind of results, right? There's motivation to be successful. And we've talked about a couple examples of that that maybe we should go into here. CERN, Super Collider.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts there?
I mean, I heard a guy say on a video today, somebody was doing a podcast, and he said, there's one thing that you can guarantee you'll get out of CERN, is another theory about something bigger they can discover if they just build a bigger machine.
Right.
Okay. So it's like, when in doubt, build a bigger machine, and keep pushing. So that being said, it just goes into the understanding that, like, they have to find things. This is the way this ties into dependability of past knowledge is understanding that what's written down and what is understood and what's accepted as this is right and these are facts and this is new science and this is going in a journal as accepted, and everything's good with, the experiment is accepted as being done in a scientific method and everything's, acceptable. Where is that information coming from? And how has it possibly been made in a biased way or by people that don't even have ill intentions, right? That aren't trying to sway people in the wrong direction, but they have so much pressures on them in terms of their career, their job, their income, their families. They're wanting to do good things, whatever they're getting potentially blinded by, you know what I mean? Where's that information coming from? What's the motives behind it? Because we're depending on everything coming out of CERN to do theoretical physics and do all the work that's being done in all the college research labs. You know what I mean? And it's like, how dependable is that information if there's so many potentials for corruption? I hate to say corruption, but like potentials for like, people getting their fingers in it and saying this is a money thing rather than a science
I
thing.
have no idea how much that project costs, but it definitely lends itself to, you better find what we're looking for or I'll find somebody who will kind of mentality. And also it's not, they'll probably argue it's repeatable. We repeated it this many times and we found this. Somebody else can come in, but nobody else has a super collider, right?
Yeah.
You can't repeat that experiment anywhere else. That's the only place. You have to go there. You have to use those same detectors. And yeah, if you do the exact same thing with the exact same machine and the exact same detectors, why wouldn't the outcome be the same?
Yeah.
So there's that element of it. And then another element of it is who's really qualified to review that data and say what you found or what you didn't find. At some point, the number of people that are smart enough and understand the way those detectors work, and it's also as good as the computer programming that's filtering for them, right? Whatever processes they do to turn the raw data into something that can be interpreted. And I just don't know. And honestly, nothing against the guys working on that project. It's really cool, but it costs a lot of money, and I just don't know what good it's doing me.
Yeah. There's a lot of things we talked about, like how many of them scientists at CERN have a bright idea that they can't bring up because it's contrary to what they're doing at CERN, and they can't just walk in one day and you say, you know what, I think we need to walk away from this collider and build this other thing, because this other thing is going to, this other $100 million or $100 billion project is going to prove our theory of everything in our particle science that we want to prove. They can't do that. They are, I mean, it would be bold to walk away from that and start attempting to gather research money for a counter project. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's they're think about how expensive that is, and the kind of funding they had to do and fundraising they had to do, you know,
Yeah.
to get that kind of money, and the money that's going into it. Where's that money coming from? And those are the people looking, saying, we're supposed to get something from this.
Yeah. And an individual scientist with a belief contrary to what the stated goals, mission goals of that project are, it, you know, they're not going to get the kind of funding they need. They need support across the board to do something of that scale.
Country level. Yeah,
Yeah.
they need country support. Yeah.
Yes. Which kind of leads me to the next one that we've talked about before, and that's the James Webb Telescope.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually read something really interesting today. So we've talked a lot about, you know, the pictures that these telescopes are taking. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, Hubble had an optical camera and could see some infrared. James Webb is almost entirely infrared. Okay, so the raw data presented as a picture is basically black and white. And I read today that it can see red and orange in the optical wavelengths, but that's it. So whenever you see blue or green or yellow or any color besides red or orange, and I'll get to this too, any color besides red or orange, that's been artificially generated in there.
Yeah.
They've taken the spectrum of what they received, and then they say, oh, this will look pretty if we make this wavelength a green, and I'll make... And it doesn't like, it's not just like a compression of our spectrum and then moved over, from what I can tell. It's like an artist saying like, let's make that, because there's so much of this, let's make that a nice purple, and then this one will make, and then you get this fabulous image that's like, wow, that's what space looks like.
Yeah.
No, that's not what space looks like.
Yeah.
Even though they say, you know, they've put it into optical ranges so that you can imagine what it would look like in your mind. But I actually stumbled across an article that was on NASA website. I can look the link up and we can put it in, but it was from NASA, and it was somebody asking basically this question back in 2016. And I don't know when the telescope was launched, but I think it was after that, right? It's only been up there a couple years, maybe, max. And the answer was, no, the James Webb can only see red and orange, and then it's mainly tuned for infrared.
Yeah.
Because that's what we see when we look out, so we want to be optimized for what we're looking out at. And I debate strongly the fact of whether we should even be bothering to look out there, but it's up there, and you know, that's what it's doing. It's taking in these infrared radiation. I think it can do like microwave radiation it can receive.
Mm-hmm.
We've got other telescopes around on the ground that do radio and X-ray measurements, and right, they get the whole electromagnetic spectrum. They're looking at all of it.
Yeah.
And then they take it, and I would say over half the time I see a picture in an article, it says artist's rendition, right?
Yeah.
So it's not even a picture from one of these telescopes.
Yeah,
It's an
no.
artist just drew something fancy.
No.
And then when it does say that it came from the telescope, it's always got a little disclaimer, or it should always have a little disclaimer that says, oh, you know, these wavelengths have been changed into the optical range. So
Yeah. I mean, it just goes to show that, you know, think about a kid going into physics or something like that, astrophysics as a freshman, and he's learning about physics, and they're talking about outer space for the first time ever. You know what I mean? Maybe in his second level class or something like that. And I wonder how many of them kids don't realize that the images they're seeing of outer space, you know, like there should be a presentation at the beginning of the year where they say, all right, we're going to go over some pictures of what we really see at outer space and what it shows on the internet.
Yeah.
And here's the truth of it. You know what I mean? Because, you know, you got to understand what you're working with. I mean, it's like glamorizing or putting a veil over their eyes and lying to them. And then when they get to the end of their degree, they start learning, oh, wait, this isn't like we got taught here. And I mean, how many times in higher level classes, I've taken 300, 400 level classes where the teacher will literally say, oh, well, the way you did it in your first class is wrong, so don't do it like that anymore. That's just what we teach at that level. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And put a building block on there, tell you that what you learned was wrong, and substitute it with the higher level understanding of what it's supposed to be. I mean, that's kind of like, to me, it's like sweeping a rug underneath of somebody before they ever get a chance to stand up. You
Yeah.
know?
And you know, just the build up of dependence on past knowledge to interpret those results that are coming in at a very high level gets dicey for me, right? You're saying, oh, well, I can't. What they're basically saying is, well, we can't really see it, but when we see this signature, it must mean this.
Yeah.
Like, oh,
Well,
I don't
not
know.
just that, but if I could probably break it down like this. 100, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, a guy was with a telescope, right? And he's looking up in outer space and he's taking data. He's got his journal and he's writing down lists of data points, you know what I mean? And he's trying to figure out the rotation and orbit patterns of this, and is this an ellipse and all this. And comes to a conclusion after decades of work. He finds that right. Everybody agrees. We stamp it. We start teaching it in school 200, 300 years later. We're in school. We're learning about what this guy 300 years ago did with a telescope and came to the conclusion of, and that's what we believe. Okay, and now that's going to be a foundational piece of our understanding of everything we're getting ready to learn for the rest of our journey. And we're not going to question it, and we're not going to go back and check his data. We're just going to say that this is a fact. And what we know is, it's the things that what we know is 99% chance that that past data is going to end up finding to be wrong. So why are we building all of these new beliefs and all of these teachings on that if we understand that this is most likely wrong? You know, and if that's not ingrained, as we said in the beginning, right, it needs to be ingrained and woven into every thought you have when you're considering new science or new understandings about the universe and theories of systems that you're seeing that people don't understand. All this talk about quantum and all this talk about quantum computing and you know, the entanglement that's going on, and it's like nobody really understands exactly what's going on, you know, and the definitions of string theory and quantum and special relativity and general relativity and all these things are up for scrutiny, and they need to be, because they might be wrong. They could be 100% wrong.
Yeah.
Right. And to say that might be bold, but that's the type of attitude you have to have if you want to be able to discover anything that's out there. You know, we say this all the time. People talk about thinking outside the box, but the truth is you got to think without a box. And that's how you really discover anything out there.
Yeah, and you know, a last note on telescopes. For me, I'd rather concentrate more on our own solar system, and our local, maybe even the galaxy. Right?
Yeah.
Probably about a month ago now, they released that new high-res picture of the Milky Way. Right? I think they said they mapped 2 billion or 3 billion points of light in the Milky Way. I believe there's 100 million stars.
And they used a computer to count this, right? Right. So
I might be saying it wrong. It's been a while since that picture came out, but I don't. Yeah. But all I know is it took them 2 years.
Yeah.
2 years just to take a photo of our own galaxy. That's my point. Okay.
Yeah.
So when we're putting this space telescope up there and trying to look 13 billion years into the past, you lose me there. If it takes 2 years to take a picture of our own galaxy, I just don't see how looking out any further than that you can really trust anything that's coming in.
Yeah.
Right? It could be totally different than what
what
we're receiving from out there.
We can end it all this, right? Because this is funny.
Yeah.
So over the past hundreds of years, right? Decades, century, we've seen them change the age of the solar system, you know, and the universe. They'll say, oh, it's 3 billion years old, it's 8 billion years old, it's 13 billion years old. The further they can look with their telescope, they keep saying it's older and older, right?
Yeah.
Well, one day, Dave, they're going to stick their big telescope out there and they're going to say it's only 6,000 years old. Oh my God, the Bible's right.
I don't know if I'm
obviously not, but don't be surprised. You know, they change it every time, and it's like, wouldn't be surprised if they come in all of a sudden and say, you know, or see a headline on Yahoo or Google and it says scientists say the universe could only be 10,000 years old, possibly.
Yeah, and I mean that's where that's funny. That's funny. That's where I'm going with, like, let's look closer. Let's look for the meaningful things for our humanity. Like,
Agreed.
you know, let's look for other life in the solar system. Let's look for resources in the solar system. I'd rather take that money and focus on, like, how do I get a big asteroid
Yeah.
to orbit, you know, push it into orbit of the Earth, and then I can mine it. How do I do that?
Yeah.
How do I establish a real space station? Not that the one we have isn't real. That's, you know, that thing's awesome. But I mean, like, a real space station with a launch pad so that we can travel even just through the solar system is a monumental task right
Say
now.
it's a misnomer.
Right?
I think space station's a misnomer. We have an orbital station.
Yeah.
We don't have a space station. That thing's not in space. That thing is in our gravity, attached to our Earth. It's orbiting.
True. I mean, if you want to describe space outside the influence of the sun, then we're even still really far from that, getting anything out there.
But yeah, it's an orbiter station. It's like
but yeah, I just mean into, you know what I mean, into a location where it's easier to launch from, rather than in the total gravity well of the Earth, where it takes a ton of energy to get.
But either way, it's just, you know, point is, we never know what the next headline is going to say now. It's so much about sensationalizing whatever they're learning. I mean, you got to make science fancy and fashionable or something, or you know what I mean, exciting. And, you know, that just stems into, webs into it. It webs into every part of it that messes it up. Turns into bad science, you know what I mean, on politics, all the fundraising, all the money, all the career paths, all the families that are going to be affected. I mean, if there's one thing we can guarantee, it's that anybody that makes a really big discovery in theoretical physics and science has a high chance of living a terrible life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just a sacrifice. Comes with it.
Yeah, because if you tell me the best picture we have of Neptune is basically just like a gray blob, I just don't know what we're seeing when we look much further. You know what I mean?
And to say so would be taboo.
Exactly.
You know?
Like that, Neptune isn't even probably 10% of the way to the edge of the sun's influence, right?
Yeah.
And we don't even have super good pictures of those outer planets, not that I've seen anyway. So I'd rather turn the telescopes inward, look closer to home, do some research of something that is more beneficial to our, you know, actual day-to-day lives, and leave that stuff for later. You know?
Yeah.
We're not colonizing away from our star anytime soon.
No.
And let alone another star, let alone another galaxy. Like, I don't know what information we can glean by just looking out there too much longer.
Yeah, in general, just very, seems like misguided. You know, the information that we build everything that we believe in on, I don't think is as solid as people understand. Yeah. You know?
Exactly, yeah. Just coming back to the fundamental topic of the day,
I should say,
is that dependability and past knowledge. And, you know, you got to approach things with a very, very open mind. And, you know, obviously not be, you know, too rejecting of people's beliefs. Everybody should be approaching with an open mind, and, you know, whatever anybody's been taught, I mean, that's fair to say that could be right, but approach on your own and with your own logic and your own senses and your own observations, and don't take anything for granted. It's hard to put yourself in that mindset, because even just from a little kid, everything you've learned and everything you've observed builds this internal belief system and what you think is true. Be open.
Yeah.
Be open.
Yeah. And if anybody wants to, I'm interested in, you know, what information do we have that stood the test of time? You know, is there any type of book or website or research group that has begun to separate and put into separate categories, saying, okay, you know, in the field of psychology, right? They got the half-life saying 5 years. Okay, going back 50 years, what information in psychology is still true today that was true 50 or 60 or 80 years ago, right? And in going through all these different fields, what information that they understood was true from 1,000 years, or 100 years ago, 500 years ago, is still true today, and then separating that from the information that continues to change. You know what I mean? And you might be able to lean on that information a little bit more, or at least begin to separate the information in your mind into different categories that you can,
Right.
you know, assess and say, okay, I can use this a little bit more for my theory, or go a little further in my understanding using that foundation, you know? So,
And it's not that you can't use, modern day beliefs to develop things. It's just
yeah,
be aware of the pitfall.
yeah,
Be aware of how important your assumptions that something is true plays into the outcome of your theory or belief on the other side,
yeah.
right?
But yeah, we'll get back more stuff about it for sure. It'll go into I'll be having a monologue about it in the when it comes to in the book, so
Yeah.
there'll be more on it.
Okay, good. And yeah, we bring it up all the time, right?
Yeah.
It comes up very frequently in our discussion, so
Yeah.
I'm sure you all hear more. But yeah, good
Sounds
talk.
good.
Like, subscribe, comment, all that stuff,
Yeah,
and we'll talk to you later.
thanks a lot.